What would Martin Luther King say if he saw this happening before the eyes of the world? Have you ever thought about that? Ever wondered what it would be like to hear that firm, serene voice, full of truth, speaking not about the times when buses were divided by color, but about a huge televised stage where injustice appears smiling, made up, dressed for a party? Martin Luther King, if he were sitting there at that 2017 Grammy Awards, watching Beyoncé be ignored even after delivering one of the most impactful works of the decade, wouldn't remain silent. He wouldn't look away. He would know, and you know too, that it wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a mirror, a true reflection of a structure that has learned to mask prejudice, to filter racism until it looks like personal taste, until it seems natural. He would see there the same thing he saw on the streets of Montgomery, a disguised hierarchy, a system saying again, you can rise but not too high, you can shine but not more than expected, you can be good but not more than they are ready to acknowledge. Beyoncé delivered Lemonade, not an album but a scream in the form of music, an ancestral scream, a manifesto of healing, of pain, of black beauty, and yet it was as if she had sung to a room without ears, as if she had stripped herself bare before the world and someone had turned their face away. And it took Adele, a white woman, almost begging for that gesture not to go unnoticed, because even when black art is perfect, it is rewarded with silence. And that's when Martin Luther King would raise his voice. He would speak to you, to each one who is moved, who revolts and then falls silent, because he knew that silence is not neutrality. Silence is part of the problem. Martin Luther King wouldn't see just a musical injustice on that stage. He would see a cycle, the same cycle, a pattern that insists on repeating itself, black excellence being questioned, black presence being tolerated but rarely celebrated, black art being loved but never at the center. He wouldn't just talk about the awards show. He would talk about a system that always asks us to explain ourselves, that always demands more, that demands justification even for our pain. He would point his finger at the discomfort that exists when a black woman presents herself completely, without filters, without concessions. When she says, I am all of this and this is how I will exist. That's unsettling. That disrupts. And he would ask you with that calmness that hurts, why do we still accept that this happens? How many more times will you see this kind of thing and just think, again? How long will you normalize this kind of invisibility? Because Martin Luther King knew that racism is not sustained only by violence. It is sustained above all by passive acceptance, by the idea that it's impossible to change, that it's just the way it is. And if even Beyoncé, with all her power, her art, her truth, is treated like this, what's left for those who don't have a stage? What happens to those black women who are brilliant and yet have their ideas ignored in meetings, their voices stifled, their names forgotten? And what does that do to the soul of someone who knows they gave their all and yet is reduced to the background? Martin Luther King would see the Grammys as a battlefield, a field where the fight for recognition continues, disguised as aesthetic choice, where the rules have been reformulated but still play against, and he wouldn't ask for a technical explanation. He wouldn't ask about sales or streams. He would ask why even today black talent needs white validation to be taken seriously. Why does it still seem revolutionary for a black woman to tell her own story, with her own aesthetic, with her own words? He would talk about what this means for black identity, for the self-esteem of our children, for the future we are building. Because awarding an album like Lemonade wouldn't just be recognizing an artist. It would be recognizing entire generations. It would be saying, I see you, I hear you, I respect your existence. But what was said on that stage was something else. It was an old message. You can be applauded as long as you don't love your blackness too loudly. That's what was heard, even if no one said it in so many words. And Martin Luther King, who always knew how to hear what is behind the words, would realize that instantly. He would talk to you about the danger of accepting praise as consolation, about how partial recognition can be as cruel as exclusion. Because when a piece of honor is torn, it is no longer useful. And he wouldn't stop there. He would show that this is not isolated, that this case is repeated in art, in politics, in science, in sports, everywhere where black presence begins to break expectations, that this pattern continues because there is still a deeply rooted idea that black people need to be exceptional to be treated as normal. And no, he wouldn't say this with hatred. Martin Luther King was not made of resentment, but he also wasn't made of passivity. He would say it firmly, with weight, with that urgency that stirs inside. You are seeing this happen. What are you going to do about it? Because justice, for him, was never a distant concept. It was practice, it was action. It was not remaining silent when what is right is being buried under applause. And he would look you in the eyes, even if you tried to look away, and say, if you see it, if you feel it, then you have the responsibility not to allow it to continue. Because every time you accept it, every time you silence yourself, you become part of the machine. Martin Luther King was never concerned with being comfortable. He was concerned with being truthful. And the truth is this. Beyoncé was erased before everyone, and that wasn't just about music. And if even the biggest artist in the world is diminished, what do you think happens to those who have no name, no stage, no light? Martin Luther King would make you look inward and then outward. And he would ask, why does your outrage last so little? Why do you get used to it so quickly? He knew that the system no longer needs shackles on its feet. Today it convinces you that there's no point in shouting, that there's no point in insisting, that it's not worth it, and you start to believe that it's really not worth it. But he didn't believe that. He walked knowing that each step could be his last. He looked cowardice in the eye with an open chest. He marched with people spitting on him, threatening him, persecuting him. And yet he continued, because he knew that whoever carries truth in their body cannot live bowed down. He knew that there are times when silence is betrayal, that accepting little is reinforcing what oppresses. And if he were there in that theater, hearing applause while justice was being left aside, he wouldn't stand up to clap. He would stand up to remind those who still forget. You need to understand this. It's not about the trophy. It's not about winning or losing. It's about what is being said when someone like Beyoncé is placed behind, even after having done everything the world demanded. She was bold. She was brilliant. She was impeccable. And yet she was ignored. And if even she is ignored, what's left for those who are just trying to exist? Martin Luther King always repeated that injustice organizes itself, that it creates ways to appear fair, that it adapts, changes clothes, changes tone, but remains the same, and that's what you saw there. A system saying that it accepts black art as long as it doesn't stir too much, as long as it doesn't remind too much, as long as it doesn't confront too much. Because when black art confronts, it's unsettling. When it asserts itself, it threatens. And when it threatens, it is left aside. But he wouldn't let it pass. He wouldn't pretend that it was just an artistic preference. He would know that there was more there, much more. There was fear, there was control. There was an attempt to contain what cannot be contained, because the truth, when spoken by a black woman, is frightening. And when she sings that truth before the world, she becomes a danger. And then you ask yourself, why does this still happen? Why in the 21st century does this invisible barrier still exist between what is created and what is recognized, between what is lived and what is awarded? Martin Luther King knew why. Because racism no longer depends on laws to exist. It is sustained in the structures behind the scenes, in the meetings where no black person is present. It hides behind the word taste, the word profile, the word target audience. And it is in these words that exclusion finds shelter. And if you don't see that, you are choosing not to see. Because it's in front of you. It's in the names that are never remembered. It's in the lists that never include. It's in the stories that always focus on the same gaze. It's in the way black people are still expected to prove that they are good, even after having shown everything. Martin Luther King would look at you and say, what prevents you from taking a stand? Fear, discomfort, lack of a place to speak? Because he didn't have a guaranteed place to speak. He made his own place with his voice, with his body, with his soul. And he did that so that you would have the courage not to accept silence as an answer. He wasn't interested in status. He wasn't after praise. He wanted truth. He wanted freedom. And freedom is not just going out on the street. Freedom is being seen, being heard, being remembered, being respected. Freedom is not having to hide to exist. and he would know that Beyoncé is not an exception. She is just the most visible reflection of a pattern that you have already seen in other places, the pattern that knocks down powerful voices, that pushes back those who dare to go further, that tolerates black people as long as they don't talk about blackness, that applauds but doesn't hand over the prize, that hears but doesn't listen. Martin Luther King wouldn't accept this as something natural. He would say that you need to be more bothered, that you need to stop romanticizing resistance, because resisting is not beautiful. Resisting is tiring, it's lonely, it's painful. And those who resist every day need more than admiration. They need action. And he would remind you that those who are silent are also saying something. That not taking a stand is taking a stand. That when you pretend it's not about you, you are strengthening those who have always wanted it to be that way. Because racism loves omission. It feeds on conformism. It hides behind indifference. And if you think all of this is an exaggeration, Martin Luther King would invite you to look again, to look deeper, to look without fear, because the truth only transforms when you have the courage to face it. And the truth is this: black art still needs to be translated to be understood. Black pain still needs to be explained to be taken seriously. Black genius still needs to be validated by someone white to be recognized. Have you ever noticed how time drags when the truth is uncomfortable? How the world slows down when the truth crosses the structures and exposes what no one wants to name? Martin Luther King Jr. wouldn't be intimidated by that. He would use time as a knife, cutting the varnish of normality, opening what is hidden, making you look head-on at a system that chooses who can be remembered and who will be ignored. And you're still there wondering if it's an exaggeration. You yourself who felt the discomfort when you saw that moment at the Grammys, but maybe took a deep breath and moved on, as everyone does. But Martin Luther King wouldn't move on. He would stop. He would demand that you stop too. Because while you continue as if nothing had happened, the world learns that it can continue to erase what it doesn't want to see. Beyoncé's exclusion on that stage wasn't a failure. It was a portrait, an exact reflection of the way racism operates today. And if you don't feel it in your body, you feel it in your soul. You feel it when you realize that even after giving everything, you still need to justify why you deserve to be there. You feel it when you see that your best is not enough, that your presence is unsettling if it is too intense, that your power is frightening if it comes without disguise. Martin Luther King would know that you know this feeling, that you have already lived this lump in your throat, this feeling of being observed, measured, tolerated, but not truly accepted. He would know that this corrodes from within, that this doesn't go away. And he would ask you more than once, how long will you allow this? Because it's not enough to recognize injustice. It is necessary to confront it, and that requires discomfort. It requires risk. It requires courage. And that's where many people stop, because it's easier to stay where you are, to pretend it's not about you. But Martin Luther King never did that. He always walked in the direction of pain, because only there he found transformation. He wouldn't ask you to change the world alone, but he would ask you to stop normalizing the erasure. Stop pretending you don't see. Stop accepting that black talent is read as an exception, that black excellence continues to be ignored if it dares to speak of ancestry, if it dares to raise its voice, if it dares to exist completely. Martin Luther King would look you in the eyes and ask what you are doing with your outrage. Does it still live in you, or has it become a habit? Does it still burn you, or has it become just another comment at the end of a news story? Because if even Beyoncé, with all that she is, all that she has done, all that she represents, can still be silenced, what do you think they are doing with the voices that haven't even been heard? And if your answer is silence, then you have already chosen a side. Now listen to me carefully. You know that this is not just about music. This is not about awards. This is about how much a black woman's truth is worth when she doesn't fit the mold, when she doesn't bend, when she doesn't want to adapt. And if the world still chooses to ignore that voice, what's left for those who have always been silenced? Martin Luther King knew that justice is action, that omission is complicity, and that every time you decide not to get involved, someone loses the chance to be recognized. Someone remains trapped in a cycle of invisibility. And you? Are you still going to accept this? Are you still going to be silent when this happens again? Because it will happen, it's already happening. Martin Luther King believed that you could be part of the change, but he never said it would be comfortable. He only said it would be necessary. If this has happened to you, comment, "I needed to hear this." If you feel that this pain is yours, don't keep it to yourself. If this touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear this too. Because if injustice doesn't move you from your place, maybe it's you who has turned to stone.